In this chapter, in qualitative research methods, let's talk about literature review. This chapter could be relevant even to quantitative methods of research. But right at the beginning, it's important to know what we do really in literature review. The literature review chapter has generally 4 parts, let us say. But it is more than the parts that you're ending up in a report. It is a process that we need to understand. What do we do in literature review? And if you do what you are expected to do, then the report comes out automatically well, because you're just going to say what you did and what you found in the literature. I would say, to begin with, in literature review, we need to really conceptualize our variables using literature. So the first part of the literature review, according to me, this may not be actually what other, maybe a lot of books say, especially in our Kenyan context, but internationally, if you look at literature review, often the literature review would begin by using literature to conceptualize your variables or constructs. Let us say I have a research topic. Does women empowerment correlate with divorce rates? Now, you see, women empowerment is a construct. How are you going to measure women empowerment? And which means in the literature review, you need to really break down this concept. And that's what I'm saying, conceptualize this construct. And you cannot just give an operational definition, a small paragraph in the introduction chapter, and say your variables are clear. No, how have social scientists deconstructed this concept called women empowerment? Because that is going to affect the way you're going to measure women empowerment. And then it is going to affect the way you're going to relate to divorce rates. So you have to begin by defining in a very systematic way, using literature, these 2 variables, if your topic is the association between women empowerment and divorce rates. The second part of the literature review goes into literature that is related to your research topic. Take your objectives one by one and say, what do we already know about this objective? Or if you are handling research questions, then you're saying, what do we already know about this research question? And what do we not know? And based on that, actually, you're going to refine your research objectives. You're going to refine your research questions. So if you have 4 research questions, each of these research questions should explore literature related to these research questions. And every section, subsection, should end by pointing out the gap, that there is something that we do not know, and that really justifies your research objectives. So, to begin with, the literature review, you are conceptualizing your constructs. Secondly, you're exploring literature related to your research objectives. Thirdly, now, having done this, you're going to choose one theory or 2, and we call this theoretical framework. Theoretical framework comes within the chapter of literature review because you are going to say, how does this literature explore this theory? How has this theory been explored by other people in previous research? How do they really conceptualize this research? Now, finally, you have examined the literature related to your research. You have developed a theoretical framework. Now, using this theoretical framework, if you look at your phenomenon, how do the variables relate to each other? And that we call conceptual framework. Conceptual framework is an illustration, is a representation of how your variables are interacting with each other. And sometimes you have to break down your variables in terms of dimensions, and therefore then conceptual framework becomes a little more nuanced, little more sophisticated. It is not simply one variable relating to another variable. Let us take the case of our example of women empowerment and divorce rates. Now, how do you dimensionalize the concept called women empowerment? Does it mean financial independence, the role in decision making? Now, that will add, those dimensions will add to this variable called women empowerment. And so this is what we are trying to do in the conceptual framework. And the arrows are very important in conceptual framework. If it is a unidirectional arrow, it suggests influence, it suggests cause. Whereas if it is bidirectional arrow, then it suggests correlation, association. Sometimes an arrow can be coming from one variable to another variable that is not related to a box or directly to a variable, but it is related to the association. And that means it can be, you're suggesting that the third variable is either moderating or mediating the relationship between two variables. And then you have your conceptual framework. In a sense, the hypothesis, even in most of our departments, if they are stated in the introduction, actually hypotheses flow from our conceptual framework. So to summarize, literature review has these 4 parts. The first part, really conceptualization of the variables. Secondly, literature related to your research objectives. Thirdly, theoretical framework. And finally, conceptual framework. And don't forget, conceptual framework is related to your hypothesis.